The phone rang while I was cleaning tape heads on a 1967 Revox G36. Sunday afternoon, studio quiet, isopropyl sharp in my nostrils. A bank compliance officer, male voice, flat, reading from a script, 17 wire transfers from my mother Eleanor's retirement account, $15,000 at a time, $255,000. Payee, Whitfield Motors Holdings, LLC. My jaw locked, hands still on the cotton swab. Whitfield Motors, my brother-in-law Craig's dealership, hadn't turned a profit in years. A court-appointed guardian authorized them, filed months ago. Mailing copies. Couldn't give me the name. He didn't need to. 11 months ago, my sister Rochelle told everyone I was using drugs. Showed them rehab forms bearing my name. Told our mother I was stealing from her. My mother stopped answering my calls. My cousins, my uncle. Over a fabricated lie. Now, I knew why she built it. I set the swab on the Revox's housing and scrolled to a name I hadn't used in 4 years. My old news director from my reporting days. Let me tell you how I got here. 7 years I spent in newsrooms chasing paper trails. County commissioners taking kickbacks on road contracts. A housing inspector who signed off on buildings he never visited. A school board treasurer who redirected lunch program funds into her husband's landscaping company. I built cases the way my mentor taught me. One document at a time, one source at a time, every claim verified before I opened my mouth on camera. The work ate me alive. 5 years, 4 ulcers, 1 marriage nearly gone. I stopped sleeping in year 3. By year 5, I was running on 4 hours a night, stomach acidic by noon, still wearing the clothes I'd put on 18 hours earlier. My wife Kayla, a pediatric nurse who worked days at the children's ward, would find me at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. cross-referencing public records on my laptop. Come to bed, she'd say. 20 minutes. 20 minutes meant 2 hours. She knew it. I knew she knew it. We stopped pretending. Election night, year 6, I was supposed to be at dinner with her parents. Instead, I was parked outside a county clerk's office with a telephoto lens, documenting after-hours document shredding for a story that would air the following week. Kayla called twice. I let it ring. When I got home at midnight, she was sitting on the couch with the lights off. I can't do this forever, she said. I know. Do you? I didn't answer because I wasn't sure. The stories mattered. People lost homes because of the officials I exposed. Kids ate contaminated food in schools those inspectors cleared. The work was necessary, but the cost was Kayla's face in the dark, asking a question I couldn't answer honestly. I quit at 31. Walked into my news director's office on a Tuesday, handed in my resignation, and drove home with the windows down and nothing on the radio. Crane Audio Studios took everything I'd saved. A converted warehouse on the east side with brick walls, high ceilings, and a loading dock I turned into a client entrance. I built the walnut shelving myself, hung charcoal acoustic panels, installed a 32-channel console under warm track lighting. The first week, I tested every connection in the signal chain, running tone through each channel while the building settled around me. Musicians came first, then podcasters, then voice actors reading audiobook chapters until midnight. Modest income, steady clients, work I could leave at the door when I went home. The reel-to-reel machines came one at a time. Estate sales, online auctions, a retired engineer in Vermont who shipped me a 1972 Stutter A80 wrapped in moving blankets. 11 machines now, all functional, all cleaned weekly with isopropyl and cotton swabs. I'd drag the swab slow across the tape heads and feel the oxide residue catch against the cotton, a gritty whisper that told me what the machine needed. People left recordings on them decades ago, birthday messages, demo tapes, someone practicing a toast for a retirement party, voice nervous and warm. The machines remember what people forget. Kayla and I found our rhythm. She worked days at the pediatric ward. I worked evenings at the studio. We met in the middle, Sunday mornings and Wednesday dinners, and it was enough, more than enough. But the anchor of my week was Tuesday morning. My mother Eleanor's kitchen on Birch Lane hadn't changed in 31 years. Same scratched wooden table with 6 chairs, none of them matching. Same hand-crocheted afghans draped over every surface. The south-facing window looked out on her garden where tomato cages stood in neat rows beside basil and rosemary she'd clip into mason jars for the neighbors. Every Tuesday I sat across from her with coffee she brewed too strong and toast she burned on one side. She was 74, small, soft-spoken, with hands that never stopped moving, folding napkins, straightening salt shakers, touching the edge of her coffee cup like she was checking it was still there. Early-stage dementia had started pulling things loose, names, dates, whether she'd eaten lunch, but she knew my face, knew my voice, knew that Tuesdays meant Emmett. I mowed her lawn every other Saturday, drove her to Dr. Fenton for her blood pressure checks, to the pharmacy for her prescriptions, to the grocery store where she'd spend 40 minutes choosing between 2 brands of the same canned peaches. I didn't mind. Those hours in the car, in the waiting room, in the produce aisle, those were the hours that mattered. My sister Rochelle was 6 years older and had been running things since our father walked out when I was 9. She organized Thanksgiving. She coordinated Christmas gifts so nobody doubled up. She chaired the women's ministry at Grace Community Church, ran the annual food drive, and sat on every committee that would have her. People in the congregation called Rochelle Crane Whitfield the most devoted daughter and sister at Grace Community. She'd touch the gold cross at her throat. Always when she said something like that. Her husband Craig ran Whitfield Motors on Route 9. I'd driven past the lot enough times to notice the inventory shrinking. Maybe 30 cars where there should have been 60. Faded Memorial Day banners still hanging in October. The showroom paint peeling near the gutters. 2 years of bleeding money, though Craig still wore pressed shirts and talked about expansion plans at family dinners. Rochelle never said Craig's dealership was failing. She also never missed an opportunity to remind everyone what I did for a living. Emmett's still playing with microphones in that warehouse, she'd tell relatives at holidays. Light tone, slight smile, the kind of dismissal that sounds like affection if you're not paying attention. I let it go. The studio paid its bills. I didn't need her approval. I was 35 when my sister erased me from my own family. 11 months before that bank compliance officer called, I drove to Birch Lane for Tuesday coffee, parked in my usual spot, walked up the porch steps past the metal rocking chairs, put my key in the lock. Eleanor didn't open the door. I knocked, called her name, knocked again. The kitchen light was on. I could see the shadow of the coffee maker on the counter through the curtain. Nothing. I called my cousin Marcus. Voicemail. Called my Aunt Patricia. Voicemail. Called Pastor Gilmore at Grace Community. His secretary said he was unavailable. The muscles across my shoulders pulled tight, a slow constriction I hadn't felt since deadline nights in the newsroom. Within a week, I found out why nobody answered. Rochelle had visited every family member, every church elder, every mutual friend. She brought a folder with professionally printed documents, intake forms from a facility called Clearwater Recovery Center. My name typed across the top, treatment dates, a counselor's signature in blue ink, a diagnosis, substance abuse, severe, all of it fabricated, every word. My hands went cold. A numbness that started at the fingertips and climbed to my wrists, the same hands that had restored 11 machines from dead silence, that had built walnut shelving and wired a 32-channel console. Useless now, hanging at my sides while I read the documents that rewrote my life. Not a single person called to ask if it was true. I drove to Eleanor's house the next morning. Rochelle was standing on the porch with a folder in her hand and a sheriff's deputy behind her. If my story has your attention, hit subscribe because that's how you make sure you see how it ends. What's your prediction? Drop it in the comments. The deputy was young, mid-20s, clean-shaven, with a belt that still creaked when he shifted his weight. He stood to Rochelle's left on the porch, one hand on a folded document and the other near his radio. a reflex that told me he'd been briefed on what to expect. Rochelle held her folder against her chest in a navy blazer over a cream dress, gold cross catching the morning light. Her expression was the one she wore for church functions: soft eyes, tight mouth, the posture of a woman shouldering a burden she hadn't asked for. "Mr. Crane," the deputy said, "I need to serve you with a temporary restraining order filed by Rochelle Crane Whitfield on behalf of Eleanor Crane." He extended the document. I took it. The filing was 2 pages, single-spaced, margins justified, legal citations in proper Blue Book format. A lawyer had prepared this, not a grieving sister with a word processor. The language described me arriving at the residence, erratic and potentially under the influence of controlled substances. I'd knocked on the door, waited, called family members, left. Nothing erratic about any of it. Attached as Exhibit A, the Clearwater Recovery Center intake forms. My name, my fabricated diagnosis, filed as evidence in a court of law. Heat crawled up the back of my neck and settled behind my ears. I read the order twice. "You are prohibited from contacting Eleanor Crane in person, by phone, by electronic communication, or through third parties," the deputy recited. "Violation is a misdemeanor offense. Do you understand the terms as stated?" "I understand them." Rochelle touched her cross. "This isn't what I wanted, Emmett. But after what happened, Mom isn't safe." I looked past her through the screen door, the hallway, the photo wall, the edge of a crocheted afghan draped over the sofa arm. Beyond the kitchen doorway, I caught a glimpse of Eleanor at the table, small and still, turning her coffee cup in her hands the way she did when something felt wrong, but she couldn't name it. Rochelle shifted her weight to block the view. "Nothing happened," I said. "The documents say otherwise." Her voice carried the exact tone of a grief counselor. Measured, warm, regretful. I'd heard it 100 times at family dinners when she delivered bad news about a church member's marriage or a neighbor's health. The performance was practiced down to the slight quiver she added on the word safe. The deputy shifted his weight again. His belt creaked. I folded the TRO, put it in my jacket pocket, walked to my truck, and drove to the office of a family attorney named David Weiss, whose name I'd gotten from a lawyer friend at the courthouse. His office was on the second floor of a converted Victorian near the town square, filing cabinets lining every wall, a desk buried under document stacks, fluorescent tubes humming above drop-ceiling tiles. Weiss was 50, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of man who'd stop being surprised by anything families did to each other around year 3 of his practice. He read the TRO, then pulled up the guardianship filing on his computer. "Emergency petition," he said, scrolling. "Fast-tracked. Granted in 72 hours. That's not unusual if the evidence looks credible. The evidence is fabricated." "I hear you, but look at this." He turned the screen toward me. 3 sworn affidavits from witnesses claiming they observed you acting abusively toward your mother. Names I don't recognize. Filed under penalty of perjury. 3 witnesses. I'd never raised my voice at Eleanor in my life. I mowed her lawn. I drove her to the pharmacy. I sat at her table every Tuesday morning for years. I'd never been alone with Eleanor and anyone else present. These people were either paid or invented. "Who are they?" Weiss read the names. "None of them meant anything to me." The filing also references your substance abuse history, citing the Clearwater recovery documents as corroboration. There is no substance abuse history. Those documents are forged. Weiss took off his glasses and cleaned them with his tie. "I believe you. But here's the problem. A judge reviewed this package: affidavits, medical documentation, a sister with a spotless community record, and signed off. Contesting the guardianship means asking that same judge to admit he made a mistake based on materials that looked legitimate at the time. How long? 6 to 9 months for a full hearing. Maybe longer if they file continuances. Cost? $35,000 to $50,000. My retainer alone is $35,000, and there's no guarantee. The burden of proof shifts to you. You'd need to demonstrate the documents are fabricated, the witnesses are lying, and the guardianship is not in Eleanor's best interest, all while your sister is living in the house presenting herself as the devoted caretaker. The number landed $35,000. The studio brought in enough to cover mortgage, equipment payments, and a modest salary. Not $35,000 in liquid reserves. What are my options? I asked. Contest the guardianship through my office. File a counter-petition. Request an independent evaluation of Eleanor's capacity. Challenge the witness affidavits. And in the meantime, Weiss put his glasses back on. In the meantime, the TRO stands. You don't contact your mother. You don't go near the house. You don't give Rochelle any ammunition to claim you violated the order. I wrote him a check for the retainer. It cleared out most of my business account. The police station was a 10-minute drive from Weiss's office. I walked in with copies of the Clearwater Recovery Center documents, a printed timeline of the guardianship filing, and a written statement explaining that the intake forms were fabricated. The desk sergeant was a thick-necked man in his 50s with a coffee ring on his desk blotter and a nameplate that read SGT Morano. He looked at the documents for about 90 seconds. "And you're saying these are fake," he said. "I've never been to Clearwater Recovery Center. I've never been to any treatment facility. These were created and distributed to my family members to discredit me." "By your sister?" "Yes." Morano leaned back. "Mr. Crane, forgery complaints involving family members are a civil matter. We can take a report, but this isn't something we'd investigate as a criminal case. Filing false documents with a court is fraud. That's something you'd want to take up with the civil division. I can give you a referral. A referral, months of process. Another door with another lock. I'd like to file the report anyway," I said. He handed me a form. I filled it out at a plastic chair bolted to the wall, under fluorescent light buzzing at 60 hertz, the same hum I stripped from studio recordings every day. I handed the completed form back. Morano stamped it, gave me a case number, and told me someone would be in touch. Nobody was in touch. I called Adult Protective Services the next morning from the studio. The reel-to-reels sat on their shelves in the warm light, the tape still threaded on the Revox G36 where I'd left it the day the bank called. The intake coordinator listened, asked screening questions, and agreed to send a caseworker to Eleanor's house for a welfare evaluation. I hung up and sat at my desk for an hour, hands flat on the surface, not moving. This was the last channel. If a PS couldn't see what was happening inside that house, no one would. The APS caseworker visited Birch Lane on a Wednesday. I know because Weiss obtained the report 2 weeks later. He read me a passage over the phone. Ms. Crane Whitfield presented an organized binder containing the patient's medication schedule, physician appointment history, and dietary plan, tabbed and indexed by category. Weiss paused. The home was described as clean and well-maintained. New grab bars installed in the bathroom. Kitchen stocked with labeled meal prep containers. Rochelle had met the caseworker at the door and given the performance of her life. Every detail choreographed to say, "This woman is cared for. This woman is safe." Eleanor told the caseworker she was comfortable. She said Rochelle was taking good care of her. She didn't mention Emmett because, in Eleanor's current state, whoever told her the story most recently was the one she believed, and Rochelle had been telling her stories for 11 months. The caseworker closed the file. Status: no evidence of neglect or exploitation. Case resolved. 3 channels. 3 failures. The attorney could fight it, but the cost would gut my business and take the better part of a year. The police filed the report in a drawer. And a PS, the agency built to protect people like Eleanor, had walked into Rochelle's stage and applauded. The church was next. Kayla came home from Sunday service at Grace Community the following week with a look I recognized, the same expression she wore when a patient coded and the family wasn't ready. "Pastor Gilmore pulled me aside after the benediction," she said. She was still in her good blouse, keys in her hand. "He said he's been praying for you. He said the congregation cares about your recovery." My recovery. He used that word, recovery. She set her keys on the counter. He said Rochelle told him, "Your addiction is breaking your mother's heart." I gripped the edge of the counter. My knuckles went white against the laminate. Rochelle had taken Eleanor's pain, the confusion of a woman with dementia who didn't understand why her son stopped visiting, and repurposed it as proof of her own story. My mother was hurting because Rochelle had cut me out of her life, and Rochelle was telling people that pain was caused by my drug use. Eleanor was a prop now. Her suffering, Rochelle's performance. "People at the hospital are asking about you," Kayla said. Janet from radiology asked if I needed the name of a counselor. 2 of the charge nurses heard through someone at church. The lie had crossed from family to congregation to workplace. A closed system of rumor that fed itself. That night, Kayla and I sat at the kitchen counter past midnight. She was still in scrubs from her evening shift. The closed police report and Weiss's retainer receipt lay between us next to an empty coffee mug. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I don't know yet." My voice had dropped. Flat, low. The register I used to use in the newsroom when a story shifted from interesting to actionable. Kayla watched my face and said nothing. After she went to bed, I pulled the bank statement printout from my jacket on the hook by the door. The paper was soft at the fold lines now, handled too many times. Yellow highlighter marked each $15,000 withdrawal down the right column. Whitfield Motors Holdings, LLC circled in red ink. The pen pressed hard enough to leave an impression on the page beneath. I carried it to the studio, sat at my desk under the warm track lighting with the reel-to-reels on their shelves, opened the guardianship filing Weiss had given me, and laid it next to the bank statement. 2 documents, side by side, under the same lamp. The guardianship was granted on a Tuesday. I ran my finger down the transfer dates, matching each one against the filing timeline. The first wire hit Eleanor's account 3 days later, Friday. $15,000 to Whitfield Motors Holdings, LLC, then another $15,000 the following month, same day of the month, same amount, same payee. 17 times. Rochelle didn't file for guardianship because she was worried about Eleanor. She filed because she needed the account access. The guardianship was the key. The transfers were the purpose. 3 days between the lock turning and the vault opening. My breathing slowed. The anger didn't disappear. It cooled into something with edges, something I could use. I'd called my old news director the week this started. He'd retired to Florida 2 years ago. Couldn't help directly, but he said one thing before we hung up. "You were the best researcher I ever had, Emmett. If something's wrong, you'll find it. You always did." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the Zoom F2 field recorder. Matchbox-sized, lavalier mic coiled beside it, microSD card slotted and ready. I pressed the power button. The red indicator light blinked twice and held steady. Thanksgiving morning, Kayla set 2 bowls of tomato soup on the kitchen table. No turkey, no casserole, no sweet potato pie with the brown sugar crust Eleanor had been making since before I was born. 2 bowls, 2 spoons, a sleeve of saltines between us. "I couldn't do it," Kayla said. "I stood in the grocery store looking at a 12-pound bird, and I just couldn't." "Soup's fine." She sat down across from me. The overhead light was too bright for the silence. My phone lay face up next to my plate. No notifications, no missed calls, no texts from cousins asking what time we were coming, no voicemails from Aunt Patricia about bringing extra chairs because the kids were getting too big to share. Nothing. Kayla reached across the table and put her hand over mine. I let her hold it. We ate soup. Outside, I could hear the Hendersons 3 doors down, laughing on their porch, the clink of glasses, someone's kid shrieking about football. "You want to watch something?" Kayla asked. Sure. We sat on the couch with a blanket and put on a nature documentary about deep-sea creatures. Neither of us watched it. At some point, Kayla fell asleep against my shoulder. I sat there listening to her breathe and looking at my phone on the coffee table. The screen stayed dark until the battery died. 3 days later, our neighbor Linda Watts knocked on the door. Linda was 71, a retired postal carrier who'd lived next to Eleanor on Birch Lane for 20 years. She'd known me since I was a kid carrying Eleanor's groceries in from the car. "I went to your mother's for Thanksgiving," Linda said. She stood on our porch with her coat zipped to her chin, hands in her pockets. "Come in," Kayla said. Linda sat at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee she didn't drink. She turned the mug in her hands, slow circles, looking at nothing. "Rochelle hosted," she said, "at your mother's house. Used Eleanor's good china, her tablecloth. Sat at the head of the table. Made the sweet potato pie." My jaw tightened. I said nothing. "Your mother was there." She looked confused, Emmett. She kept looking at the door like she was waiting for someone. "She was waiting for me." Linda nodded. "Rochelle told everyone you were at a treatment center, getting help," she said. "She said it was best if nobody contacted you during recovery, that the counselors advised against it." "What else did she say?" Linda hesitated. She looked at Kayla, then back at me. "She said you'd been taking money from Eleanor, small amounts at first, then more. She said that's why she filed for guardianship, to protect the accounts." The blood left my hands. Fingertips first, then palms, a cold withdrawal that climbed to my wrists and stayed there. Rochelle hadn't just stolen my family. She'd told them I was the thief. "How many people heard that?" I asked. "Everyone at the table. Marcus, Patricia, the Gilmores, Craig's parents." She said it during the blessing. Thank God for giving her the strength to protect her mother from financial exploitation. During the blessing, at Eleanor's table, God as her witness. Did anyone push back? Linda shook her head. Marcus asked how much you'd taken. Rochelle said she didn't want to discuss specifics, that it was a family matter being handled privately, and nobody questioned it. "They've known Rochelle for 40 years, honey. She runs the food drive. She visits the sick. She brings meals to people who've lost someone." Linda paused. I questioned it. "That's why I'm here." I looked at the table. Kayla's hand was on my forearm. Her grip was tight. "Thank you, Linda," Kayla said. After Linda left, I stood in the kitchen holding the edge of the counter. The muscles in my forearms were locked, tendons visible under the skin. Rochelle had accused me of stealing from Eleanor, the exact crime she was committing. She'd planted the accusation at a holiday dinner in front of every person who mattered. And if anyone ever looked at the draining account, she'd already installed the explanation. Emmett did it. Everyone heard. Nobody checked. I spent the next 2 days at the studio cleaning tape heads and running tone through channels I'd already tested. My hands needed something to do that wasn't dialing a phone or driving to Birch Lane. 2 days after Thanksgiving, I drove past Whitfield Motors on Route 9. I wasn't planning to stop. I was driving back from a parts supplier for the studio, and the dealership was on the way. The lot stopped me. New asphalt, black and clean. The lines freshly painted white. The old cracked concrete with its oil stains and patched potholes was gone. And the signage. The faded plastic letters on the rusting aluminum frame had been replaced with an LED panel that scrolled Whitfield Motors in blue and white, bright enough to read from a quarter mile. I pulled into the gas station across the road and parked facing the lot. The engine ticked as it cooled. Fluorescent light from the gas station canopy buzzed overhead. Craig's dealership had been bleeding money for 2 years. Half-empty lot, faded banners, peeling showroom paint. Now, it had a repaved lot and illuminated signage. That kind of renovation cost $60,000, $70,000. Minimum. I sat in my truck and watched. At 4,015, a man came out of the back office carrying a banker's box. Stocky, mid-40s, moving with the unhurried pace of someone who carried boxes every day. He loaded it into the bed of Craig's truck, went back inside, came out with another. 3 trips total. I pulled the bank statement from my jacket. The paper was soft at the fold lines now. 17 transfers. $255,000. All to Whitfield Motors Holdings, LLC. The transfers weren't paying for Eleanor's care. They were paying for asphalt and LED signs. I drove home, ate dinner with Kayla, waited until she went to bed at 10. Then I drove to the studio. The reel-to-reels sat on their shelves in the dark, the tape still threaded on the Revox G36. I turned on the desk lamp, opened my laptop, and navigated to the state's business entity database. I typed Whitfield Motors Holdings, LLC, and hit search. The filing came up, standard formation documents. Date of registration, registered agent. Everything in my body stopped. Hands on the keyboard, lungs mid-breath, pulse suspended for one full beat before it slammed back hard enough to rock me in my chair. Registered agent, Rochelle A. Crane Whitfield. I read it again, read it a third time. The name didn't change. Rochelle wasn't just the guardian sending money. She was the registered agent of the company receiving it. Her name was on the guardianship filing that authorized the transfers. Her name was on the LLC that collected them. Both ends. Every transaction. Signed, filed, documented. I scrolled to the date of registration. The LLC was formed on September 12th. I pulled up the guardianship petition on my phone. Filed October 3rd. The LLC came first. 3 weeks before Rochelle told a judge that Eleanor needed protection from her addict son, she had already registered the company that would receive Eleanor's money. The receiving end existed before the sending end was authorized. The bucket was in place before she turned on the faucet. I leaned back from the laptop. The reel-to-reels were shadows on the shelves, 11 machines that held other people's voices, other people's lives. Something cold locked behind my sternum. Not anger, past anger. This was not a sister helping her husband through a rough patch. This was an engineered pipeline. Rochelle built the container, built the cover story, destroyed my reputation to remove the only person who would notice, and turned the valve. Every step planned, every step documented, every step traceable if you knew where to look. I opened my text messages, found my cousin Marcus, typed, Rochelle is listed as registered agent of Whitfield Motors Holdings, LLC. She's on both ends of every transfer from Mom's account. Look at the attached. I took a screenshot of the business filing and attached it. My thumb hovered over the send button. I stared at the screen for 10 seconds. 20. The cursor blinked. If Marcus gets this text, he calls Rochelle. Rochelle calls Craig. Craig calls his bookkeeper. By morning, the boxes that stocky men carried to Craig's truck are in a dumpster, and Rochelle is coaching everyone on a story that will hold up just long enough to make the evidence disappear. I'd seen it happen. A county commissioner I'd investigated in year 4 got tipped off by a clerk who owed him a favor. By the time my story aired, every document I'd referenced had been refiled with altered numbers. The story ran, the evidence was gone, and nothing happened. 3 months of work, dead on arrival. I deleted the text, character by character. Watched each letter disappear until the message field was empty. Closed the laptop. Sat in the dark with my jaw locked and my hands flat on the desk. The reel-to-reels were shadows on the shelves. The studio was silent in a way that pressed against my eardrums. Patience. The word sat in my chest like a weight. Patience was the weapon. Not the text, not the phone call, not driving to Birch Lane and playing the business filing on speakerphone while Rochelle touched her gold cross and scrambled for an explanation. Patience. One document at a time, one source at a time. Every claim verified before you open your mouth. The Zoom F2 was on the charger where I'd left it after the test recording. Battery full. I uncoiled the lavalier mic and clipped it to the inside of a dark Henley hanging on the back of my chair. The mic head sat behind the second button, invisible unless you knew to look. I checked for fabric rustle, pressing the Henley flat against a chair back and brushing my hand across the chest. Clean, no noise. The mic would pick up conversation and nothing else. One party consent state. I'd checked the statute twice. Every conversation I was part of could be recorded without informing the other party. Every word would hold up in any proceeding. The recorder went back in my jacket pocket. The lavalier stayed clipped to the Henley. I hung both on the hook by the studio door, ready. I had the bank records. I had the LLC filing. I had the timeline that proved the container was built before the cover story. What I didn't have was someone inside the dealership who could confirm what those boxes contained, what the book said, where the money was booked, and how. I opened the Whitfield Motors website on my laptop. Staff page. 3 names. Craig Whitfield, owner. Marcy Pallone, sales manager. And at the bottom, the same stocky man I'd watched carrying boxes to Craig's truck that afternoon, Darnell Hooks, bookkeeper, 6 years. 6 years on the books of a dealership that had been bleeding money for 2. He'd entered the transactions. He knew what was real and what wasn't, and tomorrow I was going to find him. I found Darnell Hooks at a Sunoco station 2 miles south of the dealership on a Wednesday morning. He was topping off a gray Camry, one hand on the nozzle, the other holding a gas station coffee in a styrofoam cup. Tomorrow turned into 3 days of watching the lot to learn his routine. He stopped here every morning at 7:40, 15 minutes before his shift. I walked up from the side lot. No rush, hands visible. Darnell Hooks, he turned, mid-40s, stocky, the same man I'd watched carrying boxes to Craig's truck. His eyes swept the parking lot behind me, checking for company. My name is Emmett Crane. My mother's retirement money is on your books as car sales that never happened. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to ask if you want to be the guy who cooperated or the guy who didn't. The color left his face in stages. Forehead first, then cheeks, then lips. His hand tightened on the coffee cup hard enough to dent the styrofoam. He didn't speak for 5 seconds. 6, 7. The gas pump clicked off. He didn't deny it. I can't talk here, he said. Name a place. He gave me a diner 40 minutes outside town, off the interstate. I told him I'd be there at noon. He replaced the nozzle, got in his car, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. I was pulling out of the lot before he moved. The diner had vinyl booths patched with electrical tape. I took a booth in the back with a clear view of the door. The Zoom F2 was clipped inside my Henley, the lavalier mic positioned behind the second button. I'd tested the levels in the truck. Clean capture at conversational distance. Darnell arrived 12 minutes late. He slid into the booth across from me and ordered coffee he didn't drink. His hands stayed below the table for the first 2 minutes. The transfers, I said, $15,000 a month. How are they booked? He looked at the table. Vehicle sales. To who? Different names each month. I don't know if they're real people. Craig gives me the transaction sheets already filled out, the IN numbers, buyer names, sale prices. I enter them into the system. And the VINs? Don't match anything on the lot. I checked once, early on. The numbers correspond to vehicles that were never in inventory. Phantom cars, phantom buyers. Real money. How long has this been going on? 14 months, maybe 15. The first one came through right after Mrs. Whitfield filed the guardianship. Mrs. Whitfield. He meant Rochelle. The title told me something about the power dynamic at the dealership. She wasn't Craig's wife to the staff. She was Mrs. Whitfield. Authority, command structure. Does Rochelle know about the books? Darnell's jaw worked. He picked up his coffee, set it down without drinking. She calls every week. Wednesday mornings, usually around 9. Talks to Craig first, then asks to review the month's entries. She calls it a clean check. Make sure the numbers align with the transfers. Weekly calls. Active management. Rochelle wasn't just the guardian authorizing money out of Eleanor's account. She was quality controlling the laundering on the receiving end. Why are you telling me this? I asked. He looked at me for the first time. Because I've got 2 kids and a mortgage, and I didn't set this up. Craig handed me the sheets and told me to enter them. I knew it was wrong. I just didn't know whose money it was until you showed up at that gas station. I met him again 4 days later. Same diner, same booth. This time he brought a notebook with dates and amounts he'd written from memory. His handwriting was cramped and precise, a bookkeeper's hand. The numbers matched Eleanor's bank statements within cents. I recorded both conversations, 32-bit float audio on the micro's D card. Every word, every pause, every moment, Darnell's voice dropped when he said Rochelle's name. I swapped the card into my studio workstation that night and backed it up to 3 separate drives. 4 days after Darnell's second confession, the email arrived on a Thursday. I was at the studio cleaning oxide residue off the Studer A80's playback head when I checked the public inbox for Crane Audio Studios. Between a booking inquiry and a spam message about mixing plugins, one subject line stopped my hand mid-swab. Ray, your sister, and my father. The sender was Tanya Odom. The message was 4 lines. You don't know me, but I think your sister did to you what she did to my father. His name was Ray Odom. He was your uncle. He died alone in a motel in 2011. I've been watching the court filings for 15 years, waiting for her to do it again. Can we talk? I read it 3 times. Uncle Ray. The name surfaced from a place I hadn't visited in years. Family dinners when I was a teenager. A tall man with a quiet voice who stopped coming to holidays around the time I started high school. Rochelle had explained his absence the same way she explained everything, with concern. Ray has problems. Ray isn't well. We're praying for Ray. Ray was dead. I didn't know that. Nobody had told me. I replied with my phone number. Ray had a daughter. I hadn't known that, or if I had, Rochelle had erased it along with everything else about him. Tanya called within the hour. Her voice was flat, controlled. The kind of voice that had stopped expecting help a long time ago. She worked in logistics 2 states over. She'd been requesting copies of public guardianship filings in our county since 2014, running keyword searches for Rochelle's name. When my case was filed, the notification hit her inbox within a week. I have his things, she said. Everything he kept. It's in a storage unit. I can be there Saturday. She drove 6 hours. Arrived at the studio in a dark jacket with 3 cardboard boxes stacked in the back seat of her car. No handshake, no small talk. She carried the first box through the loading dock entrance and set it on my mixing console with the care of someone handling evidence she'd been protecting for over a decade. The boxes were labeled in ballpoint on masking tape. Legal, personal, bank. Ray's handwriting, cramped, slanting left, the letters pressed deep into the cardboard. I opened legal first. On top, a guardianship petition filed in the Sane County Courthouse. Sane Family Division, same emergency petition format. The language was close enough to mine that my vision tunneled for a second, the studio walls pulling inward. Petitioner, Rochelle A. Crane. Respondent, Raymond T. Odom. Grounds, cognitive decline, financial vulnerability, risk of exploitation by outside parties. The same playbook, same structure. 15 years earlier, Tanya stood by the shelves of reel-to-reel machines with her arms crossed. She told everyone he was gambling, showed them credit card statements she said proved he was in debt, filed the guardianship, got control of his accounts, and drained them over 18 months. How much? $87,000. Everything he had. I opened personal. Composition notebooks with black and white marbled covers. Ray's name in shaky ballpoint on the front. The pages were yellow at the edges, brittle enough that the corners crumbled when I turned them. His handwriting deteriorated across the entries, steady at first, then rushed, then scattered. The weight of the notebooks surprised me. They were light in my hands. The words inside them weren't. He wrote every day toward the end, Tanya said. He knew something was wrong but couldn't make anyone listen. I opened bank statements from a regional bank showing systematic withdrawals. The pattern was identical. Structured amounts, monthly intervals, all directed to an entity connected to Rochelle. Ray had circled individual transactions in pencil and written question marks beside them, the marks getting heavier in the later months. This isn't the first time she's done this, I said. The words came out flat, the way a diagnosis sounds when you already know. She's done this before, Tanya confirmed, and she got away with it because my father had nobody. 2 days later, my attorney Weiss called. His voice carried the careful neutrality he used for bad news. Rochelle filed an emergency motion to expand the TRO. She's claiming you've been harassing financial institutions connected to Eleanor's guardianship. A bank compliance officer mentioned your inquiry to someone at Grace Community. The judge granted the amendment this morning. The expanded order prohibited me from contacting any bank, credit union, or financial institution holding accounts in Eleanor's name. I've been planning to request her updated statements. 2 months of transfers I hadn't yet documented. How long to fight it? I asked. 3 weeks minimum. Could be 6. Those 2 months of records stayed locked behind a court order I couldn't touch. The investigation had a gap now, a blind spot right where the most recent evidence should be. That night, I sat alone in the studio, desk lamp on, overhead lights off. Raised boxes open on the floor around my chair. Darnell's recordings on the hard drive. The LLC registration printout pinned to the corkboard next to the bank statement I'd carried in my jacket until the fold lines went soft. Kayla was asleep. The studio was mine. I pulled up an old file on my computer. A story from year 3 at the station. A building inspector taking payments to pass substandard construction. I'd cultivated a source, a permit clerk named Diane Solis, who gave me documents proving the inspector's signature appeared on buildings he'd never visited. The story aired, the inspector was fired, and the permit clerk's landlord, the inspector's cousin, evicted her within a month. She lost her apartment because I needed her documents. Last I heard, she was staying with a sister in Bridgeport. I closed the file. My hands were flat on the desk, the same position I'd held them in a dozen times since this started, holding still because the alternative was moving in a direction I couldn't take back. Kayla didn't sign up for this version of me. The version that recorded conversations and cultivated reluctant witnesses and sat alone at 3 a.m., surrounded by a dead man's paperwork. I'd walked away from this life at 31 because it consumed everything around me. Now I was feeding it again, and the appetite was the same. My eyes burned. The lamp cast a yellow circle on the desk, and everything outside it was dark. I picked up one of Ray's journals. The last one, turned to the final entry. The handwriting was shaky, the ballpoint pressing hard enough to score the paper. Nobody believes me. I think she's going to take everything. I don't know who to call. The page after it was blank. Ray never wrote another word. I closed the notebook, set it on the desk. My breathing had slowed without my choosing it, the way it does when something clarifies and the noise drops away. Ray didn't have anyone. Eleanor still did. I slept 4 hours on the studio couch and drove to the county sheriff's department at 8 a.m. The police had filed my forgery complaint in a drawer. The sheriff's department had a financial crimes unit. Different building, different mandate. Detective Yolanda Price's cubicle had glass walls and a whiteboard covered in pinned transaction timelines from other cases. She was 52, built solid, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a jar of peppermints next to her keyboard. A small plaque someone had given her, the kind of joke gift that stops being a joke after 20 years, follow the money. I didn't bring her a theory. I brought her a case. Bank transfer records, 17 transactions, $255,000. Eleanor Crane to Whitfield Motors Holdings, LLC. Darnell's recorded testimony, phantom vehicle sales, fake VINs, weekly compliance calls from Rochelle. The LLC registration showing Rochelle as registered agent on the receiving entity. The fabricated witness affidavits from the guardianship filing. Ray Odom's court documents from 15 years ago. Same petitioner, same structure, same outcome. And Tanya's name and number, willing to testify. Price examined each piece separately. She read the bank records first, running her finger down the transfer dates. Then, the LLC filing. Then, Ray's guardianship petition, which she held next to mine, and compared line by line. She listened to 40 seconds of Darnell's recording, paused it, and made a note on her legal pad. The witness affidavits, she said. These names, they're dealership employees? Craig's staff. They never met Eleanor. I don't believe they wrote those statements. She unwrapped a peppermint and put it in her mouth, studied the LLC formation date, then the guardianship filing date. The LLC was registered 3 weeks before the guardianship petition, she said. Yes? She looked at the spread of documents across her desk for a long time. This isn't a family dispute, she said. This is a fraud case with a pattern. I need 72 hours to present this to the DA. I gave her Tanya's contact information and my direct number, drove home, told Kayla what had happened. Then I waited. On the second day, Kayla called from the hospital. Her voice was tight in a way I'd never heard before. Not upset, not scared. Charged. I just ran into Rochelle in the parking lot, she said. Emmett, she said something. You need to hear this. Play it, I said. Not over the phone. Come home. I drove. 14 minutes from the studio to our bungalow. Kayla was in the kitchen, still in scrubs, her phone on the counter between us. She pressed play. Rochelle's voice filled the room, clear as a studio recording. The phone's microphone had been 6 inches from her mouth, tucked in Kayla's scrubs pocket. Still married to the microphone man? Rochelle's voice, light, casual, the tone she used when she wanted you to laugh at someone who wasn't there. Kayla's voice, steady, hello Rochelle. I'm surprised you stay. He quit the only real job he ever had because he couldn't handle it. A pause. The sound of car keys jingling. Then Rochelle's voice dropped into something loose and honest, the carelessness of someone speaking to a person she considered beneath notice, and Mom's money was sitting there doing nothing. At least someone's putting it to use. The recording ended. Silence in the kitchen. My pulse was in my ears. Hard, even, a tempo I couldn't control. She walked right up to me, Kayla said. I didn't go looking for her. She came to my window while I was getting out of my car. Why were you recording? Kayla looked at me the way she looked at charts that confirmed what she already suspected. Because I'm a nurse. I document everything, and I've been recording every time I leave the hospital since Janet from radiology started asking about your recovery. I picked up the phone and played it again. Rochelle's voice through the tiny speaker, stripped of the warmth she performed for church functions, stripped of the concern she wore for judges and caseworkers. Raw, dismissive, honest for the first time. Mom's money was sitting there doing nothing. At least someone's putting it to use. Motive, knowledge, ownership, one-party consent state, I said. I know, Kayla said. I checked before I started carrying the phone in my pocket. I drove to the studio and transferred the recording to the workstation. Ran it through the noise reduction software, isolated the vocal frequencies, stripped the parking lot ambient, engine hum, distant traffic, a shopping cart rattling across asphalt. What remained was Rochelle's voice, clean enough for any courtroom. Every consonant, every pause, every word. I copied the file to 3 drives and called Detective Price. I have a recording, I said. Rochelle Crane Whitfield, in her own words, acknowledging knowledge of and motive for the transfers. Price was quiet for 3 seconds. Bring it in, and bring your wife. Price laid out everything for the DA transfers, LLC, affidavits, Darnell, Ray, and now Rochelle's own voice. The DA reviewed the pattern. 2 victims, 15 years apart, identical methods, identical outcomes. He authorized criminal fraud charges against Rochelle Crane Whitfield and Craig Whitfield. While Price built the arrest, Kayla made a different call. She filed a formal APS concern report, not as a family member this time, but as a licensed healthcare professional and mandated reporter. Different form, different weight, different intake process. The report triggered an independent welfare evaluation that bypassed Rochelle's gatekeeping entirely. No advance notice, no time to prepare the binder. The independent evaluator visited Eleanor on Birch Lane on a Tuesday morning. Rochelle was at the grocery store. Eleanor answered the door herself. The evaluator's report landed on Price's desk 2 days later. Kayla read me the relevant paragraph over the phone, her voice steady but something underneath it shook. The patient demonstrated cognitive awareness sufficient to identify immediate family members by name and photograph. When asked about financial decisions regarding her retirement account, the patient stated she had not authorized any transfers and was not aware of any changes to her accounts. When shown a copy of intake documents from Clearwater Recovery Center bearing her son's name, the patient stated she had never seen the documents and expressed confusion about their origin. Eleanor could speak for herself. She always could. Rochelle just made sure nobody asked. Price called me on a Thursday evening. "Tomorrow," she said, 11 a.m. Birch Lane. "You're riding with me." I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table until 4 a.m. with the lights off, listening to the refrigerator hum. Kayla came out at 5, put a cup of coffee in front of me, and sat down. "You okay?" she asked. "No." "Good," she said. "You shouldn't be." At 10:45 a.m., I got into the passenger seat of Price's unmarked sedan. 2 patrol cars followed us, a deputy in each. The route to Birch Lane took 11 minutes. I'd driven it 1,000 times. To mow the lawn, to bring groceries, to sit at the kitchen table on Tuesday mornings. I knew every crack in the sidewalk, every house with a flag out front, every driveway where kids left bicycles on their sides. "The existing TRO," I said. "Am I going to have a problem?" "You're present as a complainant accompanying law enforcement during service of an arrest warrant," Price said. "The warrant supersedes the restraining order. You're covered." Price parked at the curb. The patrol cars took positions at each end of the block. A neighbor across the street came out onto her porch with a coffee mug and stood watching. "Stay behind me until I read the charges," Price said. "Then you can speak." The pale yellow siding, the covered porch, the metal rocking chairs, the geranium boxes in the windows, still blooming. I hadn't stood on this porch in over a year. The last time, a deputy had served me a restraining order while Rochelle touched her gold cross and performed grief. Price knocked. 3 sharp raps. The door opened. Rochelle stood in a navy blazer over a gray dress, tortoiseshell glasses, gold cross catching the midday light. Her eyes went to Price's badge, then to the deputies on the walkway, then to me. Her hand went to the cross. "Ms. Crane Whitfield," Price said. "I'm Detective Yolanda Price, County Sheriff's Financial Crimes Unit. I have warrants for your arrest on charges of guardianship fraud, filing false statements with the court, and conspiracy to commit elder financial exploitation." Rochelle's fingers closed around the cross. "I don't understand. This is my mother's home. I'm her caretaker." "You have the right to remain silent," Price said. She continued through the full advisement. Rochelle stood in the doorway, hand on her necklace, the practiced composure holding, but the edges were wrong. Her lips pressed too thin, her shoulders pulled up a half inch. When Price finished, she stepped aside. I stepped forward. "You told everyone I was an addict," I said. My voice was low, the register I dropped into when something stopped being a conversation and became a record. "You forged rehab documents with my name on them. You showed them to our family, our church, our mother." Rochelle's mouth opened. "Emmett, you filed false witness statements from Craig's employees to steal guardianship. 3 people who never met Mom. Their names are on affidavits sworn under penalty of perjury. Those statements were, you took $255,000 of Mom's retirement and funneled it to Craig's dealership through an LLC with your name on it. Whitfield Motors Holdings, LLC, registered agent Rochelle A. Crane, Whitfield, formed 3 weeks before you filed the guardianship petition." Her mouth closed, opened. No sound came out. The hand holding the cross began to lower. "You did the same thing to Uncle Ray 15 years ago. Same petition, same courthouse, same structure. He died alone in a motel and nobody questioned it because you'd already made him invisible. The color left her face the way it had left Darnell's at the gas station, in stages, draining downward, forehead to cheeks to lips. But Darnell had been scared. Rochelle wasn't scared. The expression on her face was something I'd never seen there before. The space behind the performance was empty. The warmth, the concern, the calibrated empathy she'd worn for 41 years, all of it evacuated at once, like air leaving a room through a door that couldn't be closed again. "I have the bank records," I said. "I have Darnell's testimony. I have Ray's court filing. I have Tanya's willingness to testify. And I have your own voice on tape telling my wife that Mom's money was sitting there doing nothing." Her hand dropped from the cross. It fell to her side and stayed there. Every single word is on the record. The silence after I stopped speaking pressed against my eardrums the way studio silence does. A physical weight, the absence of sound so complete it becomes its own presence. Then, a voice from the hallway behind Rochelle, small, soft, a voice I hadn't heard in 13 months, thinner than I remembered, but it carried. "Emmett?" Eleanor stood at the edge of the living room, one hand on the doorframe. Late afternoon light came through the kitchen window behind her and caught the worn hallway carpet, the photo wall, the crocheted afghan draped over the sofa arm. She was smaller than I remembered. Her white hair was thinner, but her eyes were clear and fixed on my face. "Emmett James Crane," she said. The full name, the way she used to call me in from the yard when dinner was ready. The way she'd said it at my wedding and my graduation, and every Tuesday morning when I walked through that door, my jaw locked, my eyes burned, the muscles across my throat seized, and I couldn't swallow. I didn't look away. "I'm here, Mom." The sound of tires barking against asphalt broke the moment. Craig's truck swung into the driveway. He must have seen the patrol cars from the road because the brake lights flared before the truck had fully stopped. The transmission ground into reverse. The truck lurched backward down the driveway and into the street. He made it 30 yards. The patrol car at the end of the block pulled forward and angled across both lanes. Craig's truck stopped. A deputy was at his window before the engine died. Price turned back to Rochelle, who hadn't moved from the doorway. Her face was blank. "Mrs. Crane Whitfield, I need to process you at the vehicle. Please step outside." Rochelle walked down the porch steps in the navy blazer with the cross necklace hanging loose against her chest. The signal behind the performance had gone dead and nothing replaced it. Price guided her toward the sedan. As Rochelle reached the sidewalk, Price paused and turned back to one of the deputies. "Her handbag is inside the door. Bag it for me." The deputy retrieved a structured leather bag from the entryway table. He opened it to inventory the contents and stopped, held it out to Price. Inside, on top of a wallet and a set of keys, a leather-bound planner lay open. Forest green cover, silk ribbon bookmark. The page it was open to was dated 3 weeks before the guardianship filing. The handwriting was small, precise, and organized into columns, dates, names, action items. The first entry was dated 3 weeks before the guardianship filing. The planner Price found in Rochelle's handbag was enough for a search warrant. A judge signed it that evening. Price served it the next morning at Eleanor's house, where Rochelle had been living as caretaker before the arrest. A social worker from the county had stayed overnight with Eleanor. 2 deputies accompanied Price for the search. I wasn't present, but Price called me from the driveway 40 minutes later. "I need you to come see something," she said. "Bring your attorney." Weiss and I arrived at Birch Lane within the hour. Eleanor was sitting in the living room with the social worker, a cup of tea cooling on the end table beside her. Price led us down the hallway to the spare bedroom Rochelle had converted into a home office. Filing cabinet, printer, a desk with a blotter calendar, and a cup of pens arranged by color. Price opened the bottom drawer of the desk. Inside, standing upright like books on a shelf, were 13 more leather-bound planners. The earliest volumes had cracked burgundy spines, the leather worn smooth from decades of handling. The colors shifted through the years, burgundy to brown to navy, a progression that ended with the forest green volume Price had already bagged from the handbag. 14 total. Start with the oldest, Price said. I pulled the first volume. The inside cover had Rochelle's name in a teenager's handwriting, rounded letters with a heart over the I. I opened to a random page. It wasn't a calendar. Each entry was organized into columns. Left column, a name. Middle column, what Rochelle had done for that person. A favor, a gift, a ride to the airport, a meal delivered after surgery. Right column, what they owed her. Not money, status, support, compliance. A girl from her high school class had 3 entries spanning 2 years. The first noted a tutoring session Rochelle had volunteered for before midterms. The second recorded a recommendation letter Rochelle wrote for a summer job. The final note in the right column read, "Will say whatever I need if asked." I turned more pages. A neighbor who'd borrowed Rochelle's car for a week. Right column, owes. Will remember, a church member whose daughter Rochelle babysat for free through the summer. Right column, reliable. Will testify if needed. The word testify in a 16-year-old's planner. Keep going, Price said. I picked up volume 5. The columns were tighter, more systematic, dates with each entry now. And a new section at the back, a list of people who had wronged her. Names, dates, descriptions of the offense. A coworker who'd received a promotion Rochelle wanted, 6 entries spanning 3 years, each documenting small acts of retaliation. The final entry, handled. She transferred to Portland. My throat closed. I set the volume down and pressed my palms flat on the desk. The wood was cool under my hands. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, pressing against the blotter with each beat. Volume 9. The handwriting had matured. The back section had grown. Grudges maintained with the precision of an accounting ledger. Some had lines drawn through them, resolved. Others had notes spanning years, updated in different inks as the seasons changed. Volume 11, 15 years old. I found Uncle Ray's name on page 43. The entry was clinical. 3 pages of step-by-step planning, first the gambling accusation, then the family isolation, then the guardianship filing, then the account access. Each step had a checkbox. Each checkbox was filled in. At the bottom, in Rochelle's hand, complete. No complications. I set the volume down. My hands were steady, but my jaw had locked so tight, the pressure radiated into my temples. There's more, Price said. She opened the current volume to a tabbed section near the front. A timeline, dates running from August through October. The first entry, Register LLCD, need 3 weeks before filing. The second, Clearwater documents, use same template as row, update facility name. Row Ray Odom. She'd kept the template from 15 years ago. The third entry, witness statements, use Craig's staff, 3 minimum, sworn affidavits. They sign what I write. The fourth, remove E from family contacts. Addiction narrative, start with Patricia, then Gilmore, then Marcus. Church first, family second. My full name wasn't written anywhere, just E, a single letter. That's what I'd been reduced to in her calculations. Weiss leaned over my shoulder. His face had gone gray. This is premeditation documented across 14 volumes, he said. I've practiced family law for 22 years. I've never seen anything like this. Price unwrapped the peppermint. This is the most detailed confession I've never had to extract. She bagged all 14 volumes as evidence. The DA moved within the week. Emergency asset freeze on every account connected to Whitfield Motors Holdings, LLC. Craig's business accounts seized, Rochelle's personal accounts frozen. The $255,000 in transfers flagged for recovery, forensic accountants tracing each dollar through the phantom vehicle sales back to Eleanor's retirement fund. Craig broke before the creditors finished circling. His first meeting with his court-appointed public defender lasted 40 minutes. By minute 15, he was giving Rochelle up. Price called me that afternoon. Your brother-in-law is cooperating, she said. He's confirming everything. Rochelle directed every transfer. She set the amounts. She created the fictitious sale records and gave them to Darnell to enter. The witness affidavits from the guardianship filing. Craig says she wrote them herself and had his employees sign without reading them. The back of my neck went hot. Did they know what they were signing? Craig says Rochelle told them it was insurance paperwork for the dealership. They never met your mother, never set foot in her house. 3 people swore under oath that they'd witnessed me abusing Eleanor. They thought they were signing a form for their boss's wife. The affidavits that locked me out of my mother's life for a year were collected like office supply requisitions. Craig's testimony will be recorded for the preliminary hearing, Price said. The DA wants it on the record before he has time to reconsider. The frozen accounts triggered what Craig's dealership couldn't survive. Loan payments bounced. Creditors who'd already been circling moved in. Within weeks, the lot on Route 9 was padlocked behind a chain-link gate with a court notice zip-tied to the fence. I drove past it on a Thursday evening. The LED signage, the one Craig had installed with Eleanor's money, was dark. The repaved lot, black and clean weeks ago, already had a crack running from the gate to the showroom door. Wind pushed through the chain link with a low hum, and the smell of rain on hot asphalt rose from the pavement. Half the cars sat with flat tires and dust on the windshields, a monument to money that was never his. Pastor Gilmore called me on a Saturday evening. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Emmett," he said. His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard in it before. "I need to speak with you." "Go ahead." "I failed you. This church failed you. I believed your sister without asking a single question, and I helped spread a lie that cut you off from your family and your community." I held the phone against my ear and said nothing. "I'm addressing the congregation tomorrow," he said. "I wanted you to hear it from me first." "What are you going to say?" "The truth. That a grievous falsehood was spread within these walls. That we condemned a man without evidence. That the woman who told us to pray for your recovery was stealing from your mother." "Don't mention Rochelle by name," I said. Silence on the line. "Why not?" "Because they'll figure it out. And it'll mean more when they do." Kayla and I didn't attend that Sunday service. But Linda Watts did, and she called us from the parking lot before the congregation had finished filing out of the sanctuary. "He stood at the pulpit and said the church owed you an apology," Linda said. "He said a falsehood was spread and the fellowship failed a member of its community. He asked people to examine what they'd believed and why." "How did it land?" Kayla asked. She had the phone on speaker between us at the kitchen table. Most people sat there looking at their laps. A few women cried, but 2 families walked out. Margaret Boyce and Linda Harwell. Margaret said in the parking lot that if Rochelle was lying, then so was everything they'd built together. The food drives, the ministry, all of it. 2 holdouts. They held out for 11 days. Then the preliminary hearing happened. Courtroom 2A, ground floor. Craig sat at the witness table in a county jumpsuit, wrists uncuffed for the proceedings. His public defender had already negotiated cooperation terms, but the charges stood until sentencing. The DA asked Craig to describe the financial arrangement. Craig's voice came through the courtroom speakers flat and defeated. "Rochelle set the amounts," he said. $15,000 each time. She'd call on Wednesdays to verify the entries matched the transfers. She wrote the sale records herself. Names, VIN numbers, prices. I just handed them to Darnell, and the witness affidavits filed with the guardianship petition. She typed them up, told my guys it was insurance paperwork. They signed where she pointed. The DA let the last answer hang in the room for 3 seconds before moving on. Margaret Boyce's daughter was in the gallery. She texted her mother during the lunch recess. By that evening, the last resistance was gone. The calls started coming to Kayla's phone first. Church members, neighbors, co-workers who'd heard the addiction story through the congregation's network. Each call was an apology wrapped in shock. I didn't take most of them. Kayla handled it with the same steady patience she brought to every shift at the hospital. My cousin Marcus called on a Tuesday. The irony of the day wasn't lost on me. I should have called you, he said. When Rochelle showed us those documents, I should have picked up the phone and asked you directly. You should have. Long pause. I'm sorry, Emmett. I know. He didn't ask for forgiveness. That was the right instinct. Aunt Patricia called the next day. She cried through most of it. 2 more cousins after that. None of them asked to be forgiven either. The charges were filed in sequence. Rochelle, guardianship fraud, a felony carrying 3 to 7 years. Filing false statements with the court. Conspiracy to commit elder financial exploitation. Craig, money laundering and conspiracy. The fabricated witness affidavits, signed by his employees under false pretenses, added fraud upon the court. The same judge who had granted the emergency guardianship in 72 hours now sat in the same hearing room reviewing the fabricated foundation of the petition he'd rubber-stamped. The institutional blue carpet, the pressboard desk, the fluorescent tubes. The room hadn't changed. The paperwork had. He revoked the guardianship from the bench. The muscle in his jaw worked as he read the revocation into the record. Rochelle's name appeared in local news that evening. The coverage was concise. Former church volunteer and community organizer charged with defrauding her elderly mother of $255,000 through a fraudulent guardianship. The same outlets that would have covered her food drive now covered her arrest. The church directory was reprinted without her name. That single detail, a fresh directory with a blank space where Rochelle Crane Whitfield had been, said more than any headline. Darnell Hooks cooperated with the DA's office and received a reduced charge, accessory after the fact, probation, no prison time. The bookkeeper who chose the right side. The arraignment was on a Friday morning, courtroom 3B, second floor. Rochelle stood at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, no blazer, no cross necklace, hair flat against her head. Her face was blank. Craig stood at a separate table with his public defender. His shoulders were rounded inward, the posture of a man who'd already made his deal and was waiting to learn the cost. They didn't look at each other. The charges were read. I sat in the third row. Kayla's hand was on my knee, steady pressure. In the back of the courtroom, in the last row of wooden seats, Tanya Odom sat with a composition notebook in her lap, black and white marbled cover. Her father's name in faded ballpoint on the front. She wore a dark jacket, the same one she'd worn the day she carried those boxes into my studio. She'd driven 6 hours again. She sat with her back straight and her hands flat on the notebook, the way you hold something you've been carrying for a long time and aren't ready to set down. When the clerk finished reading the charges, Tanya closed her eyes. Her chin dipped a quarter inch. One nod. Then she opened her eyes and sat still, the notebook pressed flat against her thighs, her father's handwriting facing the ceiling. 15 years since Ray died in that motel. Tanya had been carrying those boxes the whole time. I walked out of the courthouse into November sunlight. The air was cold and clean and carried the smell of dried leaves from the oak trees along the courthouse lawn. Something behind my sternum unlocked, a tightness I'd been holding so long I'd forgotten it was there. My shoulders dropped an inch. I hadn't realized I'd been carrying them that high. I got in my truck and drove to Birch Lane. The route took 11 minutes. Same cracks in the sidewalk, same houses with flags, same driveways where kids left bicycles on their sides, except the Hendersons' driveway was empty now, a for sale sign leaning in the front yard that hadn't been there a year ago. The world had moved on while I was locked out of it. I parked at the curb, walked up the porch steps past the metal rocking chairs. The geraniums in the window boxes were done for the season. Brown stems in dry soil, no deputy, no folder, no restraining order. No one standing between me and the door. I knocked. The door opened on its own, unlatched the way Eleanor used to leave it on Tuesday mornings. She was sitting at the kitchen table. Same scratched wood, same mismatched chairs. 2 mugs of coffee already poured, steam rising in the late afternoon light. She'd known I was coming. I sat down across from her. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, small and warm. Her coffee cup sat untouched. She looked at my face the way she used to when I came home from school and something had gone wrong, studying, patient, waiting for me to be ready. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. Her voice was thin but clear. "About the garden. Rochelle had men come and dig up the back beds. Said she was putting in new drainage. But I watched them from the kitchen window. They buried something out there, Emmett. Boxes, small ones, and they filled it all back in." Like this video because it's how my story finds the people it was meant for. Tell me in the comments, would you have shown mercy or done what I did? 6 months later, I sat at Eleanor's kitchen table on Birch Lane with a cup of coffee she'd brewed too strong. Same scratched wood, same mismatched chairs. The crocheted afghans still draped over the back of the sofa. I could see through the kitchen doorway. The south-facing window was open an inch, and the smell of turned soil came through on a warm current. New tomato cages stood in the garden where rusted ones had leaned for a year under Rochelle's watch. Kayla had driven over on a Saturday in April with a flat of seedlings and a bag of compost, and the two of them had spent the afternoon on their knees in the dirt while I rebuilt the raised beds with cedar planks from the hardware store on Route 4. The boxes Eleanor had told me about, the ones Rochelle had men bury in the garden beds, turned out to be file boxes. Price's team excavated them the week after the arrest. Inside, Ray Odom's original bank records, a second set of Clearwater recovery documents with blanks left for future names, and 3 prepaid phones with no remaining call history. Rochelle had buried her toolkit. Eleanor's hand rested on the table near her cup. She turned it in slow circles the way she always had, checking it was still there. Her white hair was thinner than I remembered from before, but her eyes tracked mine when I spoke, and she laughed at the right parts. And when I told her I'd be back Thursday to fix the screen door hinge, she said good, because it's been driving me crazy for a week. Weiss handled the guardianship dissolution. The court appointed a fiduciary named Sandra Meeks who reviewed Eleanor's accounts monthly and sent me copies. I shared oversight. Sandra handled the numbers. Eleanor stayed in her house on Birch Lane where she'd lived for 31 years, and nobody stood between her and her front door. Tuesday mornings again. Coffee too strong, toast burned on one side. The routine I'd lost for 13 months restored, but the cost was still in my body. I woke at 3 a.m. most nights and checked the locks. Both doors, every window latch, the deadbolt on the studio, twice through before I could go back to sleep. Last Thursday, I stood at the kitchen window at 30:40 a.m. checking the backyard for the third time. Nothing there, never anything there. The streetlight threw a yellow stripe across the fence, and the yard was empty, and I checked it again anyway. Last month, Kayla touched my shoulder while I was reading on the couch, and I flinched so hard the coffee mug launched off the side table and shattered on the hardwood. She froze. I froze. The brown stains spread across the floor between us, and neither of us moved for 5 seconds. "Sorry," I said. "Don't be," she said. But she started announcing herself when she walked into a room. A small adjustment, the kind you make when someone you love came back from something but didn't come all the way back. The insomnia had returned. The same pattern from my newsroom years. 4 hours if I was lucky, 3 if I wasn't. I'd sat in a courtroom and watched my sister led away in an orange jumpsuit with her hands cuffed behind her back, the gold cross necklace confiscated at booking, and I'd searched my chest for something like satisfaction. Nothing. Not triumph. Not relief. A flatness. The silence after the last reel runs out and the auto-stop clicks. I would do it all again. Every recorded conversation. Every 3 a.m. session with Ray's journals. Every dollar of Weiss's retainer. But the thing about using skills you ran from is that they leave the same marks the second time. The grooves are already cut. The needle drops right back in. Rochelle took the plea deal in January. 4 years in state custody on the fraud and exploitation charges. The false court filings folded in with full restitution ordered. Her attorney had pushed for 2. The DA countered with 7. They met where cases meet, somewhere in the middle that satisfied no one, and closed the file. Craig got 3: money laundering and conspiracy. The dealership on Route 9 was closed by the court. The lot sat behind a chain-link fence with a county notice zip-tied to the gate. The LED signage Eleanor's money had paid for went dark the week the accounts were seized and hadn't been turned on since. Rain pooled in the cracks already spreading across the repaved surface. The memorial banners were gone. So were the cars. Sandra Meeks called on a Monday with the latest recovery figure: $187,000 returned to Eleanor's account. The remaining $68,000 was still moving through a second LLC registered in New York that the FBI was now investigating separately. She told me to expect another 18 months before full recovery, if full recovery was even possible. I told her to keep tracing. Tanya Odom drove back the day of the arraignment. I mailed her raised journals the following week. She didn't call to thank me. She didn't need to. Pastor Gilmore came to the studio on a Wednesday afternoon. He stood in the control booth doorway in his church blazer with his hands clasped in front of him, the posture of a man who'd rehearsed what he wanted to say and then forgotten all of it. I was at the mixing console running levels for a podcast client session that evening. I glanced up, nodded at the chair across the room, and went back to the console. The smell of his cologne mixed with the isopropyl and old magnetic tape that lived in the room's air. He sat down. The chair creaked under him. The reel-to-reels lined the wall to his left, 11 machines in warm light, and he looked at them the way people do when they don't know what they're looking at but know it matters to the person who owns them. I ran the levels. The console meters bounced green. He shifted in the chair twice. I didn't look up. When the last channel peaked clean, I turned the chair to face him. Say what you came to say, Dennis. His hands were still clasped. I preached about discernment for 18 years and didn't practice it once when it mattered. Your sister handed me a story and I swallowed it whole and fed it to 300 people who trusted me to tell them the truth. You did. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to know that I understand what I did. I looked at him for a long time. The track lighting caught the gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes that had deepened since the last time I'd seen him. That's enough, I said. For now, he nodded, stood, walked to the door and paused without turning around. The congregation took up a collection for your mother's care fund, he said. $1,400. I can bring the check by. Mail it to Sandra Meeks, I said. She handles Eleanor's accounts now. He left. The studio door closed behind him, and the acoustic seal deadened the sound of his car starting in the lot. I sat at the console and let my shoulders drop. The tension across my trapezius had been so constant I'd stopped noticing it, the way you stop hearing a refrigerator until it cycles off. Sunday afternoon. The studio was mine. I was cleaning tape heads on the 1972 Stutter A80, cotton swab dipped in isopropyl, the same ritual from the day the bank compliance officer called. The oxide residue caught against the cotton with that gritty whisper I knew by touch. The playback head was clean. The erase head needed work. I ran the swab slow across the gap, feeling for buildup. The reel clicked forward. Not my doing. The transport mechanism engaged on its own, a ghost in the electronics, the kind of thing that happens with machines this old. Tape pulled through the heads, and the monitor speakers caught a signal, a reel I'd played a dozen times. But today the words landed different. A man's voice, nervous, warm, reading from a script he'd written on something that rustled when he turned the page. Jim, I know we've had our differences over the years, and I know I wasn't always the easiest guy to work with, but I wanted to say, a pause, the sound of a throat clearing. I wanted to say that the best part of showing up to that office every morning was knowing you'd be there. So here's to 30 years. And here's to whatever comes next. The tape ran out. The take-up reel spun free, the tail end flapping against the housing in a soft, rhythmic tick until the auto stop engaged and the machine went silent. Someone had practiced that toast decades ago, recorded it, played it back, listened to his own voice to make sure it sounded right, then left the tape on the machine and never came back for it. I rewound the reel. The tape clicked back through the heads, the sound filling the studio the way breath fills a room. The machines remember what people forget. I'd said it 100 times. To clients, to Kayla, to myself on Sunday afternoons when I cleaned the heads and listened to voices that belonged to strangers who'd moved on or passed on or simply forgotten they'd left a piece of themselves behind on a reel of magnetic tape. Some things are worth the fight to preserve. Document everything. Keep the receipts. Because the day someone tries to rewrite your life, the only thing standing between their version and the truth is what you can prove. I set the cotton swab on the Studer's housing, picked up my phone from the desk, scrolled to Mom and pressed call. She answered on the second ring. "Emmett James," she said. "You coming Tuesday?" That's everything. But I know some of you are holding something back. Tell me in the comments, because your story could be the one that saves someone else. Share this with someone who needs it today.